Okay, we're recording.
Good evening. Today is Wednesday, May 6, 2020. I call this meeting of the Safety and Security Committee of the Waukesha Board of Education to order. Verification of meeting posting. Julie, can you please verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. Do we have anyone who wishes to address the committee for the opportunity for citizens to speak section?
No, we do not.
Okay, then we're going to move on to our action items. We have the minute approval from the October 21st meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved. You'll move faster than that, Corey.
Sorry. I'll second, please.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay.
Okay, so the motion passes 3-0.
Okay, on to discussion items. First, we have our facilities safety improvement update.
Yeah, I emailed out to each of you some sample documents that Findorf has been sharing with their, not only their employees directly, but also the subcontractors related to the COVID-19 and what used to be standard workplace information. And that's also goes out on a weekly basis. I think Julie's going to include that in the packet this Friday too, so you can have a hard copy. But in looking at facility safety with so much going on there, I broke it down into kind of four topic areas. One is the Findorf and the construction related correspondences that go with me. And I often use some of their information to share with our staff as well, but also working to ensure that the coordination of construction and the work that our staff is doing in cleaning up the buildings is done in an appropriate manner. And Findorf's been very flexible in terms of getting our staff into areas they need to be and keeping, suggested distancing and all that on their minds at all time. In terms of our staff, again, we keep updating them as more information becomes available related to COVID on what best practices are. We are trying to implement those. Williamson and the Buildings and Grounds crew has implemented a flexible work schedule to help stagger staff in our buildings, and also to make it more convenient. Some people just aren't, especially at our construction sites, aren't comfortable in situations where there's a lot of people maybe around and prefer to work second shift or a staggered shift or maybe at a different location. So we're trying to accommodate that as much as we possibly can. And then Joe and I and Tim have been working on what are the needed supplies out there, masks or proper chemicals for cleaning and those types of things to make sure our staff is put in the best possible position. Members of our community, one thing that we never, or at least I never thought, maybe Joe thought about this early on, was how do we get the students' materials back to them? We all kind of left and shut down in a hurry. So we've been coordinating with, really the principals are driving it. From central office, we provided them some 8 or 9 key guidelines to follow, but coordinating how parents can get in to get at the elementary level what's in the classroom and what's on the hook in the hallway. In the middle schools where we're actually replacing lockers, it's a little more urgent because quite honestly, those lockers won't be there much longer. But how do you do that with keeping the appropriate number of people in your buildings and spacing? And obviously at the elementary level, staff has to come in and help coordinate what's in the classroom versus on a hook, because our custodial crew just doesn't have any idea once they get into the classroom whose stuff is whose. At the secondary level, we're doing more of a custodial and staff driven clean out of lockers. We're bagging it and putting a name on it, and then at all the sites, and that's pretty similar to the high schools as well. And then at all the sites, with the exception of maybe one or two, we have established a drive up curbside pickup for parents and coordinated a time for them to swing by. I'm sure there's some exceptions to that, but that's kind of the guiding principle we're trying to maintain, because if we open it up kind of like an open house, you know how that goes. We get a lot of people and then you won't have any, you know, so we didn't think that was the best approach to use in that situation. So again, staff's been great, both instructional and buildings and grounds, and working around all of this, especially the ones at the middle schools and to a little lesser degree South High School, but because construction is driving a lot of those decisions. And then obviously we're doing a lot of structural improvements to our facilities. The 3 secure entrances at, or a secure entrance at Horning, Butler, and Les Paul is underway. A new secure entrance is underway at South. If you haven't been out to the sites, I also sent out a link to our webpage that has some drone shots that you can view if you don't want to drive around. Even though driving around is kind of a big thing again, you know, just like the old single drive. So we continue to make improvements there. We'll also be meeting next month with the 3 elementary schools that we have to provide secure entrances to, Hawthorne, Whittier, and Hillcrest, to begin we have preliminary plans for them to really sit down with the principals and get their input on what they're looking to do. So I think that's what I had for facility safety and for an update. And I don't know, Joe, if I missed anything that you wanted to touch on or not.
Oh, I mean, it's, getting to Darren's last, point about emptying the schools and getting lockers cleaned out. If you go back to when we first started planning around this, there were very few cases of COVID-19 in the country, let alone, even in Wisconsin, we were out ahead, trying to get plans put into place, how to impact building construction. And then when we went on our first recess from school, we were looking at about a 2-week break at that point to try to see what things, what this virus meant for us. And that's morphed then, to 2 more announcements out of the state level and a whole bunch of different changes out of the federal level. So that's the reason why we initially didn't have a really good plan as to take everything home with you. The original message was make sure your iPads are home with you. If you are using a Chromebook, make sure the Chromebook is home with you. Make sure you've got your texts home with you. That was kind of the initial piece. And then that evolved to our nurses going into schools and gathering medications so that we could do med pickups with families as the breaks, extended further and further out. And now we're trying to get our schools cleaned out for the rest of the year.
One thing to add on the pickup, since you might get questions from parents about, when can I get into my son or daughter's locker? Like the elementary levels were, I think May 11th was the first day we would allow a curbside arrangement, and we went, I believe, to the Tuesday after Memorial Day if they were doing in school pickup. So if you get a call or something, and if someone hears, well, I hear you're doing all this, some of it's staggered. One of the reasons we're holding off at the elementary is yearbooks. We like to include the yearbook distribution with the pickup rather than having them come back twice. The high schools, well, construction is driving the middle school levels, and then the high school, I think, are probably going to be delayed to about the May 11th. So again, we have to schedule all this with not only spacing out how kids and families come, but also you can't have all the staff show up, clean up their classrooms all at one time either. So we're trying to balance all that.
Thank you, Darren. Does anyone have any comments, questions for Darren?
You got your bike off, Corey?
Corey?
There you are.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm always the guy that screws that up, but and I'm sorry, Darren, I may have missed it. Have you guys published those timelines to the parents in the district yet, or is that coming?
We've left that up to the sites. It's kind of a site-specific driven thing. I set out with wanting, oh, sounds easy. It's picking up stuff, and I was going to set up these district-wide guidelines, and I quickly got into it. And I'm like, this is something the schools are going to have to communicate. The scheduling of letting their staff in the buildings to coordinate the grouping of the kids' materials and all that. So every school has its own timeline and specific plan.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything for Darren? Okay. All right, then we're on to the pandemic response plan update.
Yes, thank you. So again, with everything that's happened, we wanted to bring you what is our draft pandemic response. We were at the policy committee last month. I'm getting my months now confused. Corey asked some really good questions about a policy that is being recommended that districts have to address pandemic response. And as we discussed at that policy committee, it made good sense to bring that response plan here. You can see that it's watermarked as a draft right now because it truly is in fact a draft. When school districts began to see that this virus was being, was taking on a more serious nature around our country, we began to revisit our old pandemic plans. The one that we found in Waukesha went back to, I believe it was 2009, 2010, when the swine flu came about. And at that time, the materials that we found, it was about 2 or 3 pages of documents, had some team members. We weren't really able to dig into the discussion, just to try to give a technology history. We weren't operating in a Google platform then. A lot of stuff was stored in Microsoft and on an Eats drive or in a binder. So as we began to run into this situation, we formed a team consisted of our district nursing staff, our facilities staff. Darren was there. Sharon Feedy was there. As we began to look at the most pressing areas, as a team, we reached out to eAchieve, and we started to tap into eAchieve for instructional ideas. The eAchieve plan morphed into Steve Schloman and our curriculum department getting their eyes on it and adding to it. And what happened was, it goes down to that old saying, the failing to plan is planning to fail. And then, Eisenhower made some sort of comment about, not, planning is the thing that you need to do, but the plan isn't necessarily. And that's kind of what we experienced. The idea, we had a plan that is in draft form. It's something that, we talked about at the safety committee, or I'm sorry, at the policy committee, that the plan, we're going to revisit this as a team once we start to resume normal district activities, because the biggest missing component to a pandemic plan is what are we going to do when the pandemic ceases to be a pandemic and when we can start getting back to normal operations. And so what we'll go into in the next item on the agenda is what is our planning looking like for a return next fall to school. So take the plan for what it is. It is rather comprehensive in nature. We're looking at instructional components. We're looking at procuring cleaning materials. We're looking at PR and communications. Making sure that committees and the board is brought in, as appropriate when topics rise to a board level. It's something that through policy, by adding a policy and doing an annual review of it, we hope that we never get into a situation where dust collects on it, and that we treat this similar to our crisis response plan. So I'm available to answer any questions. Please know again, though, that this is draft form, but we did want to bring it to you for some feedback and some questions, and just so you guys know that we've got something in place, and that something will evolve when we return back to normal business.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Cook?
I do, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Montajo.
Thank you. So yeah, the district had a plan from 2009, 2010 that was about 3 pages long. I think is what you said, Dr. Cook.
Yeah, it was about that in nature. Yep.
Yeah. So I read through this when I got the packet. I'm skimming through it now. To do that amount of work in that short period of time, and I'm saying this is a draft, is outstanding. I mean, the goal is to have a plan, a pandemic plan that deals with every possible eventuality of the next pandemic, should it, unfortunately happen. That's an impossible standard. That will never occur. So we've got to do what you guys exactly are doing, is try to guess what the next one will look like, which we don't know. What will be the unique, circumstances surrounding that next pandemic or health issue. So if anybody's looking for this to be a perfect document, it's simply not going to be, but it's going to be the best we can get. So I read through it. I mean, I was hoping to see what I'm seeing now, which is as much clarity as possible. It's not simply paragraphs and paragraphs of hopes and dreams. It's specifically what happens with facilities, what happens with health services, what happens with special education. So yeah, it's right. It's better than what I had hoped we would see at this point. And to Dr. Cook's point, that this will be a living and breathing document that should be addressed. I don't know how often, maybe annually or more, I think is important too. So yeah, it's right where I would hope it would be.
We were very, very fortunate as a system that, we were able to divvy up a lot of work here, and people really bought into that work. For instance, Jason Smith at eAchieve, we asked him, here's a scenario, Jason, you have to enroll all 12,000 kids in eAchieve. And what would that look like? And he began some brainstorming on that. And we were able to take Jason's plan then, and we gave it to Steve and his instructional tech folks and said, okay, guys, if this is the case, what do we do? And Steve and the IT group were able to take that plan a little bit deeper from an instructional level. And within a very short period of time, they put together an excellent professional development for our staff. We were able to get, the vast majority of our students up and running. We closed school on a Friday, and the kids were back into instruction the following Wednesday. It went as well, I believe, as it could have gone. And it evolved certainly from, that Wednesday when kids went back. Thursday, Friday, we had spring break. The IT crew was engaged over spring break, making sure that they had resources available, answered questions. And then we were able to launch school right after spring break. And what we've observed, and I don't want to call on Steve because he's not a member of the committee, but he's there. We saw a lot of questions on the front end, and we really saw people starting to hit their stride in how to run this this educational platform. The special ed directors worked with their teachers, and you'll see that in the next presentation on guidance. Guidance for special educators. It's the great unknown right now. IDEA was never written with a pandemic in mind. Special ed services were always intended to be delivered face to face, hands on, and the laws associated with special education really said, you guys, this is what it means. What do we do now in an environment where the school district has not been able to provide all of the services for reasons that we had no control over? This wasn't a failure to serve. This wasn't a failure to plan. This wasn't a failure to hire a staff member. This is legitimately, you guys can't be face to face with kids. And so our special ed team has really done a nice job of putting guidance together in and around that. So, we're very fortunate in the people that we have and the work that we were able to accomplish in a very short period of time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cook. Sorry, I called you Mr. Cook.
You can call me anything but late for dinner.
Okay. Joe, did you want to roll right into the preliminary planning and considerations for a return to school September 2020?
Sure. So what you have in front of you is a PowerPoint presentation. And I emphasize with you that this is just our planning points right now. When we first set out on this, we were looking at possibly a return date sometime in May. That's when we began this full return to school planning. And So we broke our work down by department, and you can see that in the slides. And I'm providing you just a little bit of an overview of considerations, that we're trying to take into consideration here. We're operating off of 3 assumptions going into next September. The first assumption and scenario that we're working around is that we'll return to face-to-face. So that the kids and teachers and everybody will be back in a face-to-face manner. If that's our opportunity, that would certainly be the best case for all of us. Something that we all hope is the case, and we're making sure that we've got plans to address that. And those plans center around making sure, do we need masks? Do we have masks? Do we need thermometers to check temperatures? All that stuff is in and around that first one. The second thing that we're planning around is, what does a blended model of instruction look like? So say, for instance, if the state shutdown continues and we get into that phase 2 of return to normal, where you can get 50 people gathered, but you still need to maintain social distance. What does that look like in the classrooms? For instance, do we need to create A days and B days? Do we need to maintain, a number of staff members that are always operating in a virtual environment, so that they're not coming to school and running the risk of being ill? The idea that this infection, the research has suggested, and the data shows that kids get sick from this. They just don't get really, really sick from it. But our adult staff, those are the people that could potentially face the illness. They could have the high fever. They could be out of work for a while. So, planning around that, and you'll see what we're looking at a little bit in HR, where, what are we doing to bolster our sub pool, knowing that many of our substitute teachers are 60 years and older. They're retired educators. And so are they going to be in a position where they can serve at that capacity? Then the third scenario, and it's the one that we don't want to, we hope isn't the case. The third scenario is returning, just resuming virtual instruction. And our virtual instruction has been excellent, but we believe that we want to have, everybody back. We want to see people in our schools. We want to see sporting events and plays, and we want that school climate to really, really come back. But that's the third thing I think that we need to plan around. And we're considering staffing, student support needs, transportation, and then professional learning. Our summer institute's going to look a little bit different coming into this coming school year. I've got some guiding questions on there. Those were just brainstorming things. You can, again, see some of the stuff that we're considering. Darren, he certainly can jump in here on what the business and facilities department is looking at, but really making sure that food service and transportation are up and running and viable. We'll be paying attention to guidelines around transportation. If you look at some of our bus routes, you've got 50, 60 kids on the bus. Are there going to be social distancing rules that say you can't have 50 to 60 kids on the bus? Stuff that we need to prepare for. Planning the summer construction plans, that Darren just went over, looking at how does that butt up against the school year? What does the construction work that's going to be ongoing next school year look like in comparison to the school day? And then the multiple cleaning scenarios. As I've done some research about what's going on over in Europe and in Asian countries right now, they're looking at midday cleanings, kids wearing masks, few kids in the classroom, like 10 kids in a classroom, designated areas where you're not up and around and moving around the classroom. So, do we have to treat cleaning differently in addition to the chemicals and the frequency? Are there other steps that we need to make? HR, again, employee safety. For those of you who have looked at the CARES Act, it expires December 31st. And that provides a lot of employee protection for individuals who are caring for a COVID-infected patient or somebody who, in fact, contracts it. How does that then impact the school year? Substitute teacher pool. And then the idea of school closures. For those of you that were, on the board or involved with the Waukesha schools around swine flu, you might remember that Horny needed to be closed for a couple of days. We may run into a scenario next year where, due to absenteeism, we have the health department step in and say, Banting is closed or South High School is closed because you've hit 25% student absenteeism due to illness. And, how do we address that rolling type closure that we may experience? From a student services standpoint, the special ed service delivery is an area of extreme focus for us based off of our legal requirements to serve our students with disabilities. The mental health supports, how are we preparing to deal, and support students who have been, in an isolated type environment for a long time? How are we supporting them as they transition from, the shutdown quarantine mode to, coming back into a school where you've got 1,100 kids? That's part of our planning. Again, enrollment and transportation issues. How are we processing all of those enrollments, and in particular, the people who come in August and want to visit our office? How are we, creating efficiencies so we don't have to congregate as many people? Then just the nursing and health room services. For instance, right now, our nurses have been very actively involved with the local and state level conversations around return to school, and the recommendations that are being made right now around personal protective equipment, around additional health rooms, around temperature screenings, kids and staff being at school wearing masks. What type of mask do people need to have? I mean, all of that stuff they've got a very tight pulse on, and we're being very practical in our approach to that. We're paying attention to markets. When PPE becomes available, when can we buy it? We're trying to make sure that our costs are appropriate, and that we're pairing our need for supplies with what do we see the beginning of the school actually looking like next year, so that we don't overbuy on things, or we don't buy things that the district doesn't necessarily need or won't have a future use for. Technology, Steve and his team, they continue to look at the infrastructure needs that we have. Additional PD for staff to teach in the virtual and blended environment. And then just researching our platforms and our apps and making sure that we're staying up to speed. Steve and his team have done an excellent job of making sure that our systems are always up to date. He communicates very well when you're not to expect access to WebEx, or you might not be able to expect access to Infinite Campus. And just making sure that we're poised to start next school year if we need heavy tech reliance, that we're able to do that. Teaching and learning, the T&L crew, they're working with staff on lesson development, keeping the virtual in mind, planning, our school days. We may need to address staggered start times for kids and the entrances to the building, enhancing the hygiene. If you go to an elementary school, for instance, it's not necessarily the area where kids are covering their mouths all the time. I mean, we're going to need to teach the basic hygiene things again and make a strong emphasis on that next school year. Looking at bolstering eAchieve, Darren and I had a meeting with the eAchieve leadership. I think it was last week, where we talked about the possible influx of additional students as next school year begins. Families around the state may select that. Then making sure that we've got, that we've got additional services in there if needed to serve the students that want to access eAchieve. How are we going to address parent choice at the beginning of the school year? If we are, face to face, if we're blended, which I hope to be at that face to face, or at worst case scenario blended point, how are we addressing what the family need is to the best of our ability? We would, I guess, anticipate that as the economy opens up, as people get back to work, they will need us for a consistent level of supervision for their children, especially the young ones, as moms and dads go back to work. And we're going to want to make sure that we've got the supports in place to provide that, in addition to the before and after school care, the lunch programs, and everything else. So the approach that we're going to take until September, our executive cabinet meets daily in the morning. We talk about components of this to get ready for the school year. We will be surveying our parents, our teachers, and our kids about the virtual experience. We want to get their feedback so that, if we can make adjustments, if we can do a better job serving, we'll be doing that next school year. District administration, so the directors in teaching and learning and student services, every day of the week are involved with meetings with teachers. So they're hearing what the instructional, pluses and minuses, the areas where we need to grow, some of the challenges. They're working with them to address those, and they're putting us in a position at the district office where we have that feedback on an ongoing basis. Boy, what else are we looking at? We're looking at making sure that when the new superintendent is selected, that we, as a team, take the time to get that person on board as quickly as possible, so that they're able to, either add to or understand our planning. And then, we've had to be very, very flexible. Like I said before, when we first decided to close school, it was going to be a 2-week closure. That got extended, and it got extended again, and it got extended one more time. And so as we take a look at, what is best overall for the citizens of our state, for our community in Waukesha, we take those recommendations, very seriously, and we incorporate what that says into our planning. Knowing that our preference is to get all of our kids face to face as soon as possible, but making sure that we've got a system in place to address, some of the unknowns. The one thing that I can say about this virtual experience, as we talk to teachers, as we talk to principals, as we talk to student services staff, there has been a high level of engagement out of students. There's been a lot of connections with families as we've gone through this, and there's been a great level of support, that the district office has been able to provide our entire system, particularly our IT crew and our instructional tech specialists, to make sure that our virtual environment is running well. And so we feel very confident serving next year, obviously with the preference of coming back face to face. So with that, I put a slide in there for any questions that you may have.
Wow, Dr. Cook, this is a lot.
Yeah.
I am humbled that you have thought, your team, everyone has thought through so many things, and that you're able to just connect with each other and have so many different branches of what ifs, and are ready to go, hopefully, when those things happen. I mean, I have a lot of question marks on things, but instead of going through all of those, I think that they're forever changing. So we really don't know, and it's not like you're going to answer my question. I'll just throw one out there. The plan for regular school days was start and end times as usual, with contingency to move to some alternate set schedule, AM, PM every other week. I put a question mark by that specific one, and there isn't an answer yet, and you're not going to be able to give me an answer because we don't know what that looks like. We're still moving through this, and every day things change. So I think a lot of parents out there do have questions, but just knowing that you might not have all the answers right now, but that you're trying to think of all of the what ifs and then think through how to implement each one of those as things do roll out. So,
and we're lucky. I mean, we do have some good models. Asia and Europe right now, they operate obviously differently as countries and regions of the world, but they're 2 months or so ahead of us on this thing. And so, when you look at some countries, South Korea, for instance, that has started to return to normal. For the sports fans, that are enjoying the Korean baseball league right now, because it's the only live sport, or not even live, tape sport that you can watch, at least it's current. There were some steps that Korea took, in particular around their schools when they started to bring kids back. And so we're able to take a look at those, to give us a little bit of guidance as to what we need. For instance, in European countries, especially European countries that got sacked by this, where are they at as it pertains to coming back to normal instruction? How are they opening up their economies? Because the opening up of the economy for us is going to really tell us, where we're at with the need to serve our kids. While we do serve almost 13,000 kids, we also serve the 20-some thousand parents that are attached to those kids. And we want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position where we're very supportive of our community, as well as the students that come to our schools.
Well, the one thing, though, I think we all should take a second to think about is, unlike 2 months ago, we know worst case scenario, we can switch back to a virtual delivery system. I'm not advocating that. I hope we're all back in our schools come fall, but we know we have that resource available, and that Steve's department and TNL and student services can make that switch on the fly. And a lot of districts just don't even have anything near that capacity. So again, I'm not advocating that's what we do, but it's nice to know we can, when things really can turn back quickly.
Yeah. We're poised to make very fluid decisions if we need to. We're in a good spot for that.
Mr. Montijo.
Thank you. I'd echo your comments, Ms. Reinacek. Regarding Dr. Cook, the SROs, I know they're not district employees, and I know we can't publish, where it may or not be happening. But I guess if we could give some assurance that we're looking into that, what their role would be under the 3 scenarios. I assume that's been dealt with, but
yeah, we're currently, while we have, not had to address the face-to-face behavioral issues that are associated with it, we are still accessing our SROs on a regular basis for technology and virtual and other type of scenarios that we are dealing with around students and families. I do know that the police department in Waukesha has gone to a modified schedule for all of those officers, though, to try to keep a level of health. We can certainly look into that a little bit further, as we go forward in the next school year. Again, our hope is to be back face to face, to some capacity. If it's face to face with regular instruction, or if it's in a blended model. And once we get to that point, then we're going to have that face to face need again for those SROs on site and working with our kids and our parents and our staff.
right, makes sense. Regarding engagement, either you or Darren mentioned it. I bumped into Kyle Lemieux, the athletic director at West High School, within the last hour. He's a neighbor of mine, and he was talking about how that virtual learning has been successful in his opinion. He cited some statistics, which I don't know if public, so I won't give them on this meeting, but he said, if my recollection is correct, the engagement was actually higher than some of the classes. And engagement, in his opinion, was not just people checking in or signing up for attendance. It's essentially face-to-face through virtual learning with each student. So he said engagement's been fantastic. So he's relatively, pleased with that. And I was glad to hear that. So yeah, and to Darren's point, if you do what I call bracketing, what's the worst case scenario? Where, I don't want to say worse, but the least positive scenario is we're back to virtual in September. And that plan is already there. It's already in place. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The district doesn't have to. So we can make it better, I'm sure. But you hope for the best, plan for the worst. So yeah, it's looking pretty good.
Mr. McCaffrey, do you have anything to add?
Nope, just a lot of work that looks like it went into it, and it is great to see the collaboration between the departments in this district, because that's tough. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of competing interests, and for us to be able to, focus that energy into one singular document is fantastic.
One thing that I'd add to this is, we've been able to take the time administratively to do a lot of planning, because we've got, the backbone, the day-to-day people who pull the weight for us, our teachers, our counselors, our social workers, our psychologists, the people who are on the ground and working with kids. They were well positioned to start this model for us. If you go, I can't compare to other industries, but we were clear with staff. Friday, March 13th was when we made the decision to close. Going into that week, we were pretty clear that something big was coming. We didn't exactly know what it was going to look like, but people knew that we were planning. But the decision to close was March 13th, and we had the teachers on that following Monday and Tuesday in professional learning already to start teaching on Wednesday. And they took that and ran. I can't say, it certainly would never make the claim that things have been perfect, but we had people who bought in hook, line, and sinker to virtual instruction, in our teaching staff, and they started to deliver. So we weren't in a position where we needed to pull teeth. These people took it and ran. And when they did that, then we were able to start refining this thing very early on. And you could tell by the number of questions that came in early on. People were working very hard to understand the platforms. how do I engage kids? How do I get my videos up? How do I do, all the other stuff? And it really fell back to the infrastructure, the Blackboard 9 platform, the work that the teaching and learning department has done on curricular frameworks, and resources for teachers. We every winter we've done the Waukesha 1 conference, the instruction and the promotion of virtual learning and blending technology. And our staff, we were right now districts are starting this stuff, within the last 2 weeks. Kids are finally able to re-engage learning, and it's May there. We did that on March 13th, in a district with almost 1,000 teachers, serving nearly 13,000 kids. I mean, that in and of itself was remarkable, what we were able to do, almost with a flip of a switch. And I was called by some individuals from larger districts. How do we get this up and running? I mean, they were talking about the basic things. They're looking at ordering Chromebooks, and they were ordering Chromebooks when a pandemic was going on. Our kids had an iPad in it. We were very lucky. A lot of forward thinking there.
Yes, for all those negative things that and fears that iPads bring to the table, boy oh boy, they sure worked out this time. I think I was thinking of when I was reading through all of this, I thought, when are you sleeping, Dr. Cook? And then I realized we don't have very many behavior problems right now. So
I would say that, yeah, the things that take away sleep are generally the physical threats, that go into having kids physically present at the school. That's when the late night phone calls come in, and we haven't had that. We have had some concerning comments made, but that pace of that has been different. I think that the idea of what do we lose sleep around right now, it's when can we return. There's the academic component of school, and then there's that cultural component of school. And we as humans, we're social beings, and it's great. I mean, I find myself missing people right now that I don't even like. I mean, I'd rather be in a room full of people that I don't like right now just to be in a room full of people. And I think that that's the thing that, if there's anything that keeps me up at night right now and keeps me thinking, it's, how are we going to reestablish that school culture? How are we going to reestablish, those social norms that we have in a school? How are we going to help people overcome, a legitimate fear of something that, we still don't know a whole lot about? I mean, all of those things are the things now that it's that future thinking stuff, that keeps me awake at night. For those kids, we do a lot of abuse and neglect reporting, as a school district. We've got kids now that are 24/7 in that environment. They don't have that break in the school day. I mean, those are the kids that are on my mind right now.
thank you.
I'm so sorry, Karen.
That's okay. Go ahead.
And I would assume educators are well aware that the duty to, mandatory reporting is still there, whether it's something they see in the background or something they hear. It's absolutely there.
Luke sent those that reminder out yesterday or the day before. So we continue to update people on that and that requirement and that expectation. Yes.
Yeah, because we've got a window essentially into somebody's homes, and that's something we haven't had before. And it's not something that we're looking for, but we can't ignore something that's there.
Right.
I just wanted to echo, being Teacher Appreciation Week. I just want to thank the teachers as well for adapting to this change and just rolling with it and doing all that they can. And so you're right. I think that we couldn't do it without them. They are the soldiers on the field. And I think that they have had a lot of support though throughout the years, as you've been talking about through professional development, to be able to say, I think I can do this. And we've had the technology long enough and them working with the kids with this technology more and more, that I think that has been a huge part as well. So thank you, teachers. Happy Teacher Appreciation Week. You're probably not going to get the flowers on your desks as you normally would, but we really do appreciate all that you are doing.
The one thing that I think I'd add to that, as our superintendent, Todd Gray, he created a culture where it was okay to try it. And if it didn't work, it was okay to say it didn't work and then make it better. And that has really, his mantra of be the tortoise, his willingness to let people take risk. It certainly benefited us, in these times. People are trying new things. 7, 8 years ago, when we launched when we launched the iPad initiative, that was a huge risk, that was supported by Todd, supported by the Board of Ed at the time, something that Steve, was really a proponent of. And you think about all of those opportunities along the way, where people were able to take a chance, feel comfortable taking a chance. That made us successful when the rubber hit the road during this virtual shift. And not all school districts, and I've been fortunate to work in other districts. It's given me good perspective, but not all school districts have a culture like that. We're fortunate to have that here.
I agree. Anyone else? Okay. Well, then we're going to move on to metal detector discussion.
Yeah, so the topic of metal detectors, if we go back about 6 months, it came to us pretty significantly after the events at South High School on December 2nd, as well as North High School on December 2nd. And Karen and I have had a few conversations along the way about this, and we've had some questions come in from the community on metal detectors. Since we haven't had a chance to meet, we added it to the agenda as a discussion item, for some feedback from the committee on it. Our preliminary research around metal detectors, really revolved around cost and staffing. We talked with law enforcement agencies that, what's their recommendation on it? Where are they used? We've reached out to some other school districts. That there was a concern. There were a number of events in and around December around the state. And a lot of school districts, and ourselves included, did not feel it was an appropriate step for us to take at this time. Due to cost, due to staffing, due to the impact on school culture, as well as the substantial investment that we're making in other areas of school safety. From SROs to the secure front doors, to the curriculum and the teaching that we're doing with kids around social and emotional and decision making and such. So we're coming to you tonight, albeit it's a couple months late, to have the discussion and see if there's any avenues that you'd like us to take a look at as a school district.
Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns?
I do, but I'll defer to whoever else wants to speak first.
I'll just make a comment, Karen, about metal detectors. I've talked to some people about them who, especially after the incident in December, and in my opinion, the metal detectors are not needed at this point. I think at this point, the way history is going right now, we'd probably be better to invest in digital thermometers than metal detectors, because I think that's going to be what is going to get our kids into school next school year. We're going to be taking temperatures at an entrance instead of walking them through metal detectors. So.
And I don't mean to get off. I just want the board to know that we did just put an order in for 50
right.
50.
The laser ones. Yeah.
Yeah, the laser ones, so that we don't have to do the contact. I want you guys to know that we are starting to buy some things. I forgot to mention that earlier.
Yeah, no, I figured we'd be on that, because that's what they're doing in China right now, is they're taking everybody's temperature before they come in school. If you have a temperature, you're not allowed in. So, but I've had concerns about metal detectors that the cost is very high, because you have to put them either at every entrance, or you have to reorganize your school flow to have them at one entrance. which can also be a security risk too, because if everybody's going through that same entrance, it's a huge target outside that a metal detector is not going to catch if somebody pulls up and shoots everybody going into the school. And so metal detectors, they have their place. I've been through many of them down in MPS. They make you go through them at sporting events down at MPS as well. It's just not schools. So if you go to a basketball game on Saturday, you're going through a metal detector to get into the gym. In my opinion, metal detectors are not needed right now. We have other more pressing issues related to student safety than that.
Thank you, Mr. Montijo.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the goal is to, similar to the pandemic plan, the goal is to keep our students and our staff absolutely safe. So there are no firearms on campus. There are no shootings. Like the pandemic plan, it's an impossible standard. We'll never do that. Schools are and will probably always be a soft target. We could lock down the school. We could search every student. We could pat down every guest. We could have metal detectors. We could wand everybody. And still, like Mr. McCaffrey mentioned, it's a soft target. You could shoot the lines that are coming up. You could do terrible things. It's a problem that, unless there's a fundamental change in society, which never happens, will never be solved. We can never eradicate it, unfortunately. So we've got to do the cost benefit analysis is what do we trade off for the culture and the safety? How do you balance those two things? I don't support metal detectors in the school district of Waukesha. If things get worse, it's a new day and it's a new discussion. The culture is extremely important. We are going through so many changes, the students are and the teachers are, to throw this at them, coming back with possible virtual learning, blended learning, metal detectors. I got to think of a better word than freak out, but there's a risk of it could simply make things worse. I don't think we have a firearm problem in the school district of Waukesha. The weapon or the item that was brought by the South student was a facsimile weapon, as a pellet gun. It's still justified what the officers did. The North High School, I don't remember if that was on campus or off campus. There was a couple years ago at Summit View or in the neighborhood, there was right around deer hunting season, someone saw a weapon. I think it was someone loading a rifle in their truck. So no, I don't think they're needed. I understand the discussion. I think it's a good discussion we're having. I think people are curious about it. I think like the pandemic plan, it's a rolling thing we should always look at, but I think it should be our last resort. It's a culture thing. It's a safety thing. I mean, you don't trade off safety for culture, but you trade off a little bit of safety for a little bit of culture. So I guess that's where I stand. I could talk for 3 hours about it, but no one wants to hear that. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. A few months ago, I brought this to Dr. Cook as a discussion, and because we were talking about this pandemic paperwork that we needed to get done, these policies, and then it turned into the COVID. We had to just keep pushing it off. So now we're here, and just as Pat said, I was thinking before, instead of a metal detector, we should have them walk through to check their temperature. So it's very different right now than in the atmosphere than it was 6 months ago, 5 months ago, when people were concerned about students bringing weapons to school, because within 24 hours it had happened multiple times around the state, mostly here, and it was a scary situation. So now we're completely dealing with something different, and it doesn't seem to be the right time. But we hadn't had a safety meeting in I'm not sure how many months, so this is why it was put on this agenda. And again, just like you guys, I completely agree. We're looking at something completely different right now. We've had a lot going on just in this state and in school district of Waukesha to have two huge issues to look at. Issues isn't the word. I mean, we have a pandemic, and then we had a terrible thing that happened. So they're both on opposite ends of the spectrum. Because we don't have kids in school right now, we're not going to be worried about that. And if we do have kids in school, it might be limited. It completely changes things. So I'm I'm on board with both of you and probably with Dr. Cook too, that now is not the time.
In my experience with these situations, and I've never had a shooting before until last December, I would recommend and have recommended to my boards, don't have this conversation right after an event because
Mhm.
the clarity of thought, it's human nature, it's no one's fault. But you get caught up in the emotion of event rather than, giving the blessing of time to kind of ponder impacts. And 'cause I'd hate to lose some of that cultural things Corey was talking about because of the snap decision. So though it wasn't our plan to wait 2 months, I don't think it hurt us to take a little time and consider it.
I'm sorry. I do have one question.
Yes, Mr. Monty-Hope?
Thank you. And I know there's a pending criminal case and the South student bail jumping and whatever. So I don't know if this is possible now. I would, I guess, respectfully request at some point that we get it. I call it a TikTok. It's a timeline of exactly what happened. Who did what on the South incident and the North incident. What was the first call or first idea or suggestion there was a firearm? Who reported it? How did it work? How did our system work? A timeline of 9:15. I don't remember what time it was in the morning. Boom, 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 boom. So we can see the processes that at that time were in place. How do they work? What was the response time? How the SROs do? My guess, as someone who's in the legal field, is that's not going to be open to publication until a case is resolved, which could be a year or two. But I hope the district is looking into that, getting that ready. Probably not publishing it because it could, damage the prosecution. But that's something at some point we're going to need on all those incidents.
Yeah, up until coronavirus, we were in regular conversations around those debriefings. With the law enforcement agency, we had sat down and met with the South administration to have an understanding. Like you said, there are pending criminal charges, so there are some things that may still need some time based off of the court. But we've begun that debriefing process, talking about what went well, what did not go well. The same thing, but to a lesser degree with the incident that happened at North. There was North began, with a student report to administration, and that triggered things. It was a very challenging day for all involved, because just as we thought we had a handle on things that happened at South, we got the call on North. It was a very challenging day, but we do have bits and pieces of that, but some of that is still waiting, pending the criminal case.
Good.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. Does anyone else have anything?
No.
I have a question, Karen. What is summer school going to look like? Do we know yet?
The state passed an emergency rule, I believe it was called, that is going to allow us to go virtual for summer school right now. Okay. The Amy Riebel is leading a team through making sure that we've got the planning in place. So she's talking to, the DPI emergency rule allows us essentially to run K-12 summer school virtually. Now it's a matter of designing, what does it look like for band instruction during that time? Because marching band at the high school
right.
has been very popular. What does it look like in a credit recovery sense, which is something we've always been able to provide? But what does it look like for enrichment and enhancement? Right. What does it look like for strength and conditioning? What the virtual PE, which our summer school program has had very high participation in. Right. So all of that is being worked on, but we got the blessing to go K-12. The old virtual instruction in summer school was only allowed for credit recovery at the high school level.
Oh, okay.
And so the state rule now expands it now to essentially a full summer school program virtually. If that gets modified due to the status of the virus in the state, we certainly would be looking at that. Going into coronavirus with the construction planning, one of the things that Darren was working heavily on was making sure that we had taken South, most of South, all of our middle schools offline as sites.
Right.
And then, letting Amy and her team plan around having a middle school and high school program at North High School. So a lot of that stuff was in the works, and from a construction end, now it's being worked on from a virtual.
What I mean, virtual enrichment could be tough. We might not get a lot of signups for that. What is that going to look like on our FTEs? I know that we recover some of that stuff budgetarily.
I think I have the F and F chair kind of teasing our agenda for Monday.
A little bit.
It's going to be fantastic for all
I
the
bet.
viewers out there.
That's what I figured. It's going to be weird.
Yeah, it is a concern. I mean,
Yeah.
we pull in, I want to say it's 150 full-time students, and then there's the aid impact of it. We're going to talk about that on Monday because it,
Yeah.
Like you said, we have no idea for some of these classes whether we'll get 2 kids or
Right.
102, especially when you get into speed and strength and band and some of those at the high school that really generate a lot of minutes for us.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so in other business, recommendations for future committee meetings. Does anyone have anything?
No.
Okay. Do we have anything else that is needed at this time, Julie?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Then wrapping up, the next Safety and Security Committee meeting is scheduled for July 20th, 2020. Can't forget that one. At 6 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty. Have a great night.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
You.
Bye.
Bye.